I'm sorry, I was just told I couldn't hear. So I need to start over again. So, welcome. This is almost a year since George Floyd's death. And one of the reasons why we here at LEDA started this is in reaction to his death. We wanted to be more positive as well as more assertive than issuing a statement. So I started these live stream conversations in order to be able to have people who don't always look like us, who don't sound like us, who don't grow up like us, or who don't come from different places to see what their lives are like and what is it like going through life with their background and their advantages or equity or inequity or privileges. One of the things about George Floyd's murder, and we can call it that now because it's been formally classified as a murder, is that a young woman, a 17-year-old woman, took the video and she wanted to help. She wanted to help him, but she knew she couldn't because of the police presence. So she just kept taking the video and ended up posting it to social media. And she started a movement, an international movement that went all the way around the world, not just here in the United States. One of the things to remember is that everyone has a voice and our voices should be heard, particularly younger people who sometimes we tend to overlook. We older folk tend to overlook younger people because we may not know what they're thinking or their actions or what their thoughts are in relationship to different actions that happen externally. So, in the interest of that, it just so happened that the person that will be speaking to us today is a young woman. Her name is Samantha Suarez. And let me bring her on. Hi, Sam. How are
Hi,
you?
Gloria. Thanks for having me.
Great. And the only thing that I'll say about Sam is that she's under 30. So, but she has, I think, quite a fascinating life so far and really has a lot of excellent observations and thoughts to give us. Um, so, Sam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I understand you are from Manila in the Philippines.
Yes. So I was born in the US, but I grew up most of my life in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, with my family. I went to university in Sydney, Australia, partially because it's much nearer than getting educated in the States and a little cheaper too. Um, and now I'm here living in Grand Rapids. I've lived here since 2016.
Great. And curious, why Grand Rapids? Do you have family in the area?
Yeah. A lot of people ask me that actually. I have an uncle who lives here. Technically, he's my godfather, but in Filipino culture, if your families are super close, you just call them uncle, basically. And yeah, he convinced me to move here, even though I've never seen this place, and I trusted him because family. And now I don't regret the decision at all. Although maybe I did at first.
Great. Although, for those of us, okay, I'm looking out the window now, and now I don't see any snow in the middle of April. There was snowing a few minutes ago, so now the sun is out. So that's a little bit different than the Philippines.
Yeah,
So
it's tropical there. We're like right above the equator, so it's hot the whole year. Maybe wet sometimes, but hot.
great. Um, so you went to university in Australia, as you mentioned. What has been your experience in Australia as coming from the Philippines compared to your experiences in the US?
That's a really interesting question. Like I mentioned, Australia is much nearer to the Philippines than the US is. So a lot of the white people in Australia are a bit maybe more used to seeing Asians around. In my observation, at least in school, we were the largest minority group there. So I didn't maybe get as many comments like, why is your English so good? Since they were used to seeing us around. And like, when people from Australia maybe wanted to do some international traveling, Asia was a maybe more obvious choice for them since it's so near. So a lot of them did like backpacking trips in Thailand and Vietnam and maybe had a little more knowledge of the culture. Whereas maybe in America there's a bit more of a monolithical treatment of it because they don't know the difference between Korea and China or something like that.
And it's really interesting about Asian Americans. And actually, before I go on to my next question, maybe you can help clarify something for us. What is the appropriate terminology to use? Asian Pacific Americans, Asian Americans? I mean, I know that there's a lot of people that are starting to wonder what the right terminology is, mainly because we want to be certain that we're respectful.
Right. No, thank you for asking that. AAPI is a pretty commonly accepted acronym, which means Asian American Pacific Islander. But again, it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about hate crimes that are experienced by the entire continent, you can say AAPI. But if you're talking about like specific stuff like xenophobia, like specific racism against Chinese people, then you can say Chinese American or Chinese. So it depends on the situation, I would say.
Well, a lot of people here really can't tell the difference
Yeah.
between someone from the Philippines and someone from China or someone from Korea or someone from Japan. And I know that gets mixed up a lot.
Yeah, that's frustrating for sure. I mean, and you see that all around and across history. Like, I'm sure everyone knows about Vincent Chin being murdered in Detroit not too long ago during the Japanese auto industry rise. And like two white dudes basically beat him to death on the night of his bachelor party with a baseball bat. And they thought it was because he was Japanese and he was Chinese. Not that it's right to get killed if you're Japanese either, but it's like extra, and adds an extra layer of stupidity that he wasn't even the right race.
Right. And in fact, I do remember that because I was living in the Detroit area when that happened. And it was quite distressing to see, not just because they thought he was Japanese, but just for looking like an Asian person. That
Yeah,
was
I mean, I've gotten people saying "annyeonghaseyo" to me here, which is like the hello for Korean and not Korean.
exactly. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Right now, I just wanted to focus on you and your experiences coming here. Um, your day job is really interesting. It's with a city building nonprofit organization, downtown Grand Rapids. What does this organization do?
Oh, that's a good question. We do a lot, and a lot of it's behind the scenes. So basically, our job is to kind of develop downtown Grand Rapids specifically, so not the entire city, but the downtown area, into a welcoming and vibrant place to be, whether it's from a resident perspective, so by you having all the amenities you need to have a comfortable life there, or from a visitor perspective, having cool places to be and cool things to do. And from a business perspective, like we want businesses to thrive downtown. So all these things that we do, things like events like Movies on Monroe, Relax at Rosa, that's probably what we're most famous for. We also helped open the new skate facility downtown at 555 Monroe. We're also one of the major partners that are helping restore the Grand River, try to make it more vibrant and inviting, having more activities around that area. Things like mobility, bus shelters, helping with the scooter programming initiative. Like we partnered with the city for that one, but basically we just do a lot of stuff behind the scenes like that to make downtown more vibrant.
Great. And, I live in Grand Rapids, so before COVID, and hopefully the summer would be great, but going around and just seeing all the people that are out there enjoying the weather and all the different activities that are in Grand Rapids. And I know that there's a big push to try and have a lot of different ethnic groups and involved in that. Can you share with us a little bit about what downtown Grand Rapids does with respect to that?
Sure, yeah. We try to encourage different kinds of programming all around downtown through businesses and events. So we have a grant called the Retail Incubation Grant. And if you apply to that, we can basically help you open your business downtown by giving you a little seed money to help you with the rent from opening a downtown business. And I think we do prioritize businesses with less representation. So a few businesses that have received this grant are Mosby's Popcorn, GR Noir, Art Caribbean Fusion Cuisine. So these are all minority-owned businesses. In terms of events, we do an event sponsorship grant as well, and it also does prioritize events that you don't get to see downtown that much. So we do give some money to the Asian Foundation team, which I work for on the side, to do the annual Asian Pacific Festival, as well as the Lunar New Year Festival, and we actually have an upcoming water festival that we're trying to plan too, which is like a Southeast Asian type of celebration.
That's really sounds interesting. Can you go a little bit into each of the different types of festivals and the background? Because I know that different Asian holidays are not really widely known here in Michigan, particularly on the west side of the state. And I think it would really help educate people to understand, for example, why you would have a moon festival, for example.
Okay, I can't speak as much to that because Lunar New Year is not a huge deal in the Philippines compared to like China and Vietnam, perhaps. But basically, it's just a festival that happens every February, and we just like try to celebrate as much try to represent as many Asian cultures as possible in it, even though there is more of an emphasis on a few countries when it comes to that specific one. But we just try to showcase everyone and give everyone a spot and try to push that whole we're not a monolith thing. So especially in the annual festival that we're best known for, the one in June, we try to show off, everything from Vietnamese, Korean, Hmong, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, everything when it comes to performances, food, and everything. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. Thank you. What are the dates for the festival in June this year?
I want to say it's June 10 and 11 or 9 and 10. I should know that at the back of my head, but I don't. But I will, if you go to graph.org, all the information's there.
Great. Thank you. So you mentioned that you volunteer with the Grand Rapids Asian Pacific Foundation. What is the mission?
Our mission is to educate and share Asian culture with West Michigan. So, like I said, we're best known for our annual festival that takes place every June, the Grand Rapids Asian Pacific Festival. And believe it or not, this was the very first festival celebrating Asian culture in all of West Michigan, and the first one was in 2017. So it's both like very important and very cool that that happened, but also kind of sad that it took that long. So, but we do other stuff too besides events. We are trying to participate in more panels now, and we organized our Stop Asian Hate rally a few weeks ago, and we do a lot of food drives to distribute food and other goods to folks that need it, especially during this pandemic.
One of the things that people may not be aware of is the wide variety and diversity of people and languages. For example, the Hispanic Festival, basically it's English and Spanish, but the Asian Pacific Festival would be how many different languages and backgrounds and that people may not be aware of.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, and again, it goes back to the whole we're not a monolith thing, and people kind of forget that, in the Philippines, for example, the main languages are English and Tagalog. But even in the Philippines, there's tons of different dialects of the Filipino language. So I'm from Manila, and Tagalog and English are more common, more widely spoken. But if I go to a different province, like Cebu, they speak Cebuano, and I might understand a little of the words, but not really. So I think people need, and that's why we do this festival to try to remind people that it's not every Asian person you see is Chinese or Korean or whatever ethnicity you're most used to seeing around. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this festival and all the education we do.
So speaking of languages, you were just talking about Manila, you speak English and Spanish.
Tagalog.
I mean, Tagalog. I realize that I've been pronouncing it wrong all these years.
It's okay. Yeah, a lot of people say Tagalog because it sounds like tag-along. But
Tagalog.
yes.
Some people may not know the history of the Philippines. And because you notice I said English and Spanish. Can you just give us a quick little brief lesson on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Philippines basically never existed until Spain colonized us. It was just 7,000 islands with different chiefs running them, and you know, they probably interacted with each other a little bit, but for the most part, we weren't like united as one country. Um, so that's why it's called the Philippines, actually, after King Philip of Spain. So we were a Spanish colony for about 350 years, I believe. And then we became an American colony for 50 years. And there was a short time we were occupied by Japan during World War II as well. So there's a lot of influences there. And that's why like my last name is Suarez, because of Spanish colonization. And Tagalog actually has a lot of words in common with Spanish. Not enough that like I can say I speak Spanish, obviously, but for example, mesa is the same thing, table in Tagalog and Spanish, I believe. And I call my uncles and aunts Tito and Tita, and I believe it's Tio and Tia in Spanish. So things like that. It's pretty cool to see the influences. But there's also like a little bit of a Malay like influence there, I believe. I can't remember a word right now that kind of shows us. Salamat, that's thank you. And I think there's a salamat or something like that. So it's
Mhm.
kind of cool like how it all blends together.
Well, that's great. Thank you
Yeah.
for helping us learn about that. Um, so you mentioned the special events. So let's now go to what's going on right now, a difficult topic, hate crimes and hateful events to Asian American Pacific Islanders. Besides the obvious incidents, can you discuss microaggressions and implicit bias towards Asian American Pacific Islanders?
Sure. Do you want me to like talk about examples of microaggressions or just ones I've experienced or
Well, I think, first of all, maybe mention some of the um, atrocities that have happened that have made the news, and then we can go into microaggressions that you've experienced or other people have experienced. People may not be aware of that they may be acting in a way that might not be respectful or offensive.
Sure. Yeah, well, since this pandemic has started, Asians have been used as a Asian API people have been used as a scapegoat for this. And this is not the first time this has happened. I think one frustrating thing I've experienced is that people think Asian hate is new, but it's not. It's just like a bit more in the spotlight or mainstream right now. According to this group, Stop AAPI Hate, um, between March 2020 and Feb 2021, there were 3,800 anti-Asian hate incidents reported in the U.S., and that's the reported one, because other data says that Asian Americans are the least likely to report hate crimes or incidents. So it's probably much higher than that, and it's just crazy to think that people think this is new. And like from the Chinese Exclusion Act to Vincent Chin, which we talked about, it's in our history to kind of have anti-Asian sentiment, and people need to remember that because history repeats itself or it rhymes, you know.
And that's a lot of people until quite recently thought of Asian Americans as quote the model minority, um, you know, and also good in math and technical things like that.
Well, I suck at math, so it's obviously not correct. Yeah, so if I can go into that a little bit, I guess, but basically the model minority myth was kind of invented to be like, oh, we discriminated against Asians in the past with the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Japanese internment camps, but look at them now. A lot of them are doctors and stuff like that. So why can't you do it, other minority groups? So it's kind of one, othering Asians, two, putting down other minority groups for being treated like crap and like trying to blame them for not being able to do well with the not good hand they were given by white supremacy. And it also kind of demeans Asian success. So, like, if some Asian person does something really accomplishing, you're just gonna like dismiss it as well. That's just the way they are, and it's kind of not true too, because the whole stereotype that we're doctors and lawyers and all that, it's there's like a lot that goes into that. First of all, the Chinese Exclusion Act banned Chinese laborers from coming into the country. So and you were only allowed to come in if you were like a diplomat or a businessman. So that's why you have a lot of people that own restaurants and laundry businesses, like especially earlier on. And so it's kind of making sure the folks that were let in were the ones with a little bit more money in a way. So that kind of like contributed to that. And it's also kind of adding to the monolith thing because the country of origin of the Asian person in that we're talking about has a lot to do with determining their status in the United States. Like, and the doctor thing doesn't apply to a lot of Southeast Asians, like Filipinos, Cambodians, Thailand, Vietnam, because they're more likely to come from poorer countries or be refugees even. So, and that's not even to say that all East Asians, like Japanese, Chinese, Koreans from wealthier countries are all doctors either, because some of them are in poverty. People don't know this, but Asians out of every group have the largest wealth gap between, so like the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. It's like there's a huge disparity there. So, and that saying that everyone's a doctor and movies like Crazy Rich Asians, as still important as that was to have that, it's like a little bit adding to that whole thing.
Right. I was watching that movie and saying, oh, this is a great fantasy, but it probably isn't. It's a very, very, very small proportion of, people in Asian countries. But the other thing is there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes and underneath than what we see in media, for example.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, a lot of that is um sometimes a bit performative too, like Raya and the Last Dragon. I like the movie, but there's things that are a bit problematic in it. As much as I liked it, it was like, for example, most of the actors are East Asian, even though it's a Southeast Asian representation movie. And like even more screwed up, in my opinion, is that it's not available to stream on Disney Plus in most Southeast Asian countries, as far as my friends have told me. So it's like Disney being greedy again and trying to like, look at us, we're cool, we like diversity, but like you're not giving the people you're representing access to the movie. So it's like, what's that?
right. I mean, it's sort of like, me being Mexican. I remember when the movie Selena came out and they used Jennifer Lopez, who's Puerto Rican, to be Selena, even though Selena was Mexican. So there was that same kind of discussion within the different groups and having people that make the decisions not be aware of the differences and distinctions. I think it's important for us to keep talking and showing the different distinctions and illustrating why it makes sense or why not. I mean, one of the reasons why Disney, for example, would make a movie or film like that, besides being entertaining, is to start by increasing their market share among, Asian Pacific Islander families. But it's not quite exactly spot on.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the Disney Corporation is just aware that, especially the Chinese market, like China, the
Mhm.
actual country, like they have a lot of money to spend. And that's why I think they cater a lot of things towards them, even if it's not done in the best way.
Correct. So let's talk a little bit more personal. We discussed, some of the major obvious incidents. Can you discuss, microaggressions and implicit biases that you've seen or heard of, and then maybe what has you've seen and has been directed to you personally here in Grand Rapids, West Michigan?
Yeah, sure. I think the most common one I got when I first moved here is, why is your English so good? And that was a frustrating one, obviously, coming from the Philippines, since we were an American colony. So I kind of wish more Americans kind of knew that, because I don't think they do. Um, Another one is the whole, where are you really from? I don't get that one as much, but I hear a lot of that from my friends, even though they're born and from here. When I first moved here, actually, the first thing my uncle did was take me out, and a guy talked to me, just like asking, like, what's your situation? And I mentioned I just moved here from the Philippines, and his first question was to ask me if I'm here to get married, kind of implying the whole mail order bride thing. So um, there's just a lot of stuff like that, and And even though it seems like it's not a big deal because it's just words and it's not like it's a slur per se, it does still other you, and make you feel like you're never going to be quite American enough, the perpetual foreigner thing. And just assuming all these screwed up things that I'm here to trick someone to give me citizenship or something like that. And there's just way more nuance to that. There are a lot of undocumented people out there, Asian and other ethnicities, but you don't get to treat people like that just because of documents.
Exactly. And you are an American citizen, correct?
I am, yes.
Yes. I mean, and that's a thing, we're trying to have this whole West Michigan area be very welcoming to people, but that's examples like what you said don't make you feel like you belong, like you're different, like you are, oh, there's someone who doesn't look like they're from here. Where are they from? Oh, her English is perfect. So things like that. So, um, what else would you like to share with us?
I guess I have like some fun, not fun, it's sad, but interesting data that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. Like, back to the coronavirus pandemic. A lot of, I think because people assume, people kind of, I think Asians are a forgotten minority, maybe except for these past few months after mainstream media has given us more attention. But throughout the years, I think we've been forgotten, especially in terms of data. And I think that really hurts us. Like thinking that we're just doing great as a minority group obviously hurts us. And one way that shows is um, through careers, for example. Like the idea that Asians are all doing well and rich and professional and all that doesn't help us because Asians, I found in one data, is they are the least likely to get promoted out of any group. So while people see us as like docile, hardworking, and smart, so maybe that gets us in the door in terms of a professional setting, we are the least likely to be promoted into leadership roles because they just see us as not leadership material. Like, yeah, I'm hardworking, but you don't have a great personality. You don't have like you're not vocal enough to be a leader and things like that. Filipino nurses, for example, they're 30% of all the nurses that have died because of COVID-19, but they only make up 4% of nurses. So there's obviously something going on behind the scenes, and because people don't pay attention to separating the monolith of Asia, it kind of hurts us. So if you're not giving special like attention to Filipino nurses in your data, things will be missed, and things like 30% of them dying for whatever reason are happening, even though they're only 4% of the nurses.
That is a very interesting and disturbing statistic.
Yeah,
Because,
it's not getting enough attention.
right. So, you have an audience here. What thoughts would you like to leave with us?
Um, I would like people to do a little reading, try to educate yourself, especially when it comes to Asian history. You can look at, you know, um, the Chinese workers that helped build the railroad, the Chinese massacre of 1871, when a mob in Los Angeles murdered 19 Chinese residents. 15 of them were hanged, and one of them was like a 14 or 15-year-old boy. The Exclusion Act, like I talked about, of 1882, which was the first law restricting immigration into the United States, and it was directed at Asians. The Page Act is a huge one, and it's kind of related in a way, to the Atlanta area shooting where a lot of Asian women were killed. That Page Act kind of was the first law that kind of sexualized Asian women in a way because it barred immigrants from youth coming in if they were perceived as like promiscuous and prostitutes. And there was a lot of fear back then of Chinese women spreading sexually transmitted infections. They were just scapegoated that way, even though there's obviously white women who were sex workers too. Um, that's obviously not to say that sex work isn't work. Sex work is work, but it's just like messed up that it's only associated with Asian women who might not even be sex workers, like in the case of the Atlanta area shooting. I don't think all of them were. Another one is Japanese internment camps to look at, Vincent Chin. I just want people to educate themselves so that they don't think that this is all new, because that it is not. And advocate for Asian history to be taught in schools. Speak up when you see injustices happening, especially when it comes to your family and your dinner table and your friend group, because that's where you can make the most difference. Support the rallies and donate to Asian organizations that help fight this stigma.
Great. Thank you for that, Sam. You mentioned the hangings in Los Angeles. I mean, I'm from LA and I thought I pretty much knew the history, and this is the first time that I've heard about it. I mean, I just learned about the Tulsa City Massacre for the Black population, the Black Wall Street that they had here, but what happened in Los Angeles, can you share a little bit with us about that, what that was?
Yeah, that was right before the Chinese Exclusion Act. So I think, and after the completion of the railroad. So I believe, I'm not like a genius historian, so please correct me if you hear anything wrong, but I've done some research on this. So the Chinese were brought here to build the railroad, and once that was over, I guess they were done with them and didn't want them there. So I guess all that anti-Chinese sentiment just kind of bubbled up, and it ended up with a massacre in Chinatowns, and in Los Angeles' Chinatown, and it led to the hanging of a lot of Chinese people for basically no reason, and later on that the Chinese Exclusion Act passed. So that's as much as I know about it. It's kind of screwed up how little I knew until I started pursuing that knowledge, because people don't really care to know, and the information isn't readily out there. I'm actually trying to do a project right now about Asian history in Grand Rapids, and I went to like the library and the museum, and even they admitted that it's not well documented. And part of that is because of these exclusion acts, because it's probably not a good idea while you're here undocumented to be like, hi, my name is, so obviously it's not well documented. But I think another reason for that is that we are a forgotten minority, like I said. So people don't think it's important to share that knowledge.
Well, thank you. It's one of the things that we always need to remember is who writes the history. And what we're finding out more and more is that there's so much history that has been forgotten or not written about or just not considered when we teach our children, when we learn about what happens in different areas of the country. It is what happens. What we remember is what gets publicized or what gets written about. Yet there's so much that doesn't, but it's there in pockets all
And
around.
even when it is publicized, it's by a certain lens. So like even with Black history, I don't want to speak for not my community, but basically American history when it comes to the Black community is, and Martin Luther King fixed everything and racism doesn't exist. And so like even when it is documented, it might not be exactly correct. So that's another thing to think about.
Well, exactly. If everything was fixed and everything was fine, you and I wouldn't be having these
Yes,
conversations.
exactly.
So that was many, many years ago. So Sam, thank you so much. Did you want to say anything about the rally that's coming up this coming Saturday?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please join us for another Stop Asian Hate rally. This time it's in Holland, and it'll start at noon. I'm not familiar with the Holland area, so maybe you can visit graph.org, grapf.org, and we should have the address there and all the information you need to find out where to meet us. Bring signs and everything. We also have a Facebook page, Grand Rapids Asian Pacific Foundation. So if social media is more your jam than a website, all the information's there too.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And you can stick around for just a couple of minutes when we're done.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Gloria.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on. And again, please join us on the first and third Wednesday of each month. All of our interviews are available on our YouTube channel, as well as on our Facebook page. And I encourage everyone to keep learning and to keep focusing on helping get messages out, as well as being respectful of each other. Thank you again. Take care.